You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty Podcast.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty across the country and in your region. And if you'd like us to do a show focused on your region, you can contact us at knuckleheadsofliberty.com and send us an email there so we can check that out. But today we're actually going to be visiting with Scotty Boman, who is a part of the advisory council for the District 4 for the city of Detroit. And so he is an elected libertarian there. So we always love to hear about their experiences and how they came around to liberty and what's going on in their area. So we've got Scotty Boman with us. But before we get to that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty, and retired engineer in the state of California as well. My name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So, Scotty, Detroit, you're an advisory council member there. Tell us a little bit about what it is you do and how you came to deciding that you wanted to move the cause of liberty by taking that position.
Well, what the Community Advisory Council is designed to do is improve communication between residents and their city government. So it's not really a legislative office. It's not really an executive office or a judicial office, but more a facilitating, I suppose, office, a liaison office, a way of communicating with people and interacting then both with all of the other elected officials, but doing so on behalf of the community and then bringing word back to the community about what their government's up to. So that's what I do in that role. I got involved really as far as being a libertarian way back in the late 80s. I had been familiar philosophically with some ideas, having read extensively a lot of Ayn Rand, and then looking at some other writers later on and communicating with people on individual liberty issues and the philosophy. And I was living in Kalamazoo at the time, I think, when that happened. Eventually moved back to Detroit and have been living in Detroit most of my life. I was born in Detroit. I'm actually in the same part of town that I was living in back when I was a child. And so I was connected with the community. I knew people here. Now, one thing unique about, well, not so unique, but one thing about Detroit that makes it characteristically kind of a surprising place for a libertarian to get elected is that it is almost exclusively Democratic. I mean, most of the people identify as Democrats, some of them extremely strong in that position. The elected officials, we have nonpartisan elections in the city, so I wasn't on the ballot listed as a libertarian, but I didn't keep it a secret either. So it was a nonpartisan ballot, which I think made it easier for an individual to get noticed based upon, my own qualifications rather than simply having a party label attached and people jumping to conclusions about it. So,
well, Scotty, can I quote you there for just a second? James, can you bring up our Liberty map so people can kind of get a sense of where all this is? So this is Cato's Liberty map, and it kind of shows how roughly all these different places are doing with respect to liberty. So the state of Michigan is right here, which is where Detroit is, that Scotty is an elected official in. And Cato, actually, this map, I think, was put together a couple of years ago, but they actually say that Michigan is doing pretty well overall. They're number 7 in their 50 states now. I don't know if there's been any changes since all the COVID and everything else, but certainly that is the way things were stacked up when they did that. One of the things that maybe has changed a little is, I guess, there was a little bit more Republican representation there, and now it's sort of shifted, as Scotty was saying, more toward Democrats, I think. So you can see that certainly the senators are Democrats, and it's kind of split on the House members. As far as the executive executive thing, as Scotty's saying, it's mostly Democrat. And as far as the state legislature there, it just sort of tilts a little toward Democrats. So anyways, just wanted to give everybody a sense of where we're talking about and what Scotty's talking about sort of the demographic of the state. So go ahead, Scotty.
Well, I was going to say with Detroit isn't necessarily reflective of the demographics of the whole state. So even when the state at large had a Republican governor and a legislature that was maybe slightly majority Republican, Detroit was still, the voters. If you looked at the statistics, the votes were straight ticket Democrat voters in the city of Detroit, as opposed to much of the rest of the state, which may swing, as far as the major parties go, in either of those directions, or where Detroit, there's certain regions are solidly dedicated to one of the major parties, and other ones are more split and more.
So Scotty, are you? Does the advisory council that you have been elected to, do they have any specific powers, any statutory powers, anything at all in terms of powers that they can do?
Well, what they have some pull, because they really because we act as a voice for the community. The public officials do listen to us, and they do meet with us, and they do have, so we have some influence. We don't vote on specific legislation. We can't enforce anything specifically. So there aren't direct powers, it's indirect powers.
Got you. So so in terms of this council, I'm assuming, since this is based in Detroit, and Detroit is heavily democratic, how you as a libertarian function in such an environment? Do you have to compromise on your principles to get anything done?
No, I haven't had to, and I don't intend to. I'm not really compromising on my principles. For instance, if I tell a elected official that people in such and such region, let's say, are complaining about the marijuana dispensary down the street. On the other hand, I will state my personal opinion that if the marijuana dispensary isn't really doing anything disruptive, and I haven't seen any of them do that, I'm certainly not going to back up any claims about problems, and I'm going to stick up for them and say, well, by the way, I haven't seen them doing anything wrong. I'm just saying my neighbor told me this, and I'm passing it along, but I haven't seen any trouble there. And I would actually go and talk to the people at the marijuana dispensary and say, hey, there's people complaining about this and that. I don't know if there's anything to it. I'm just letting you know that's what people are saying about it. So like you said, I'm sharing information. I may be sharing information that or opinions I don't agree with, but I'm not making it my own opinion. I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm going to say what someone else believes. And I'm still going to be quite clear about what I believe. And I do tell people, speak my mind when people bring things up. So, and when it comes up at meetings, like, if someone complaining, like saying, I've had people at meetings, for instance, say, oh, we got this thing with gun violence, you need more restrictions on guns. I'm like, well, hold on a minute. People do have a right to defend themselves, and I don't think we need to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. And in fact, I have, separate from my official role, but still being clearly known for my official role, been involved in various activities supporting libertarian friendly causes in Detroit, be it speaking out against the taxation and, in fact, even overtaxation by the government's own standards of people in the city, and standing up against restrictions on gun ownership, standing up for the rights of businesses to sell their products and conduct business in the community. So I have, been a voice for liberty at the same time that I'm going to pass along as a representative of my constituents anything they have to say.
Scotty, I know you mentioned that you had kind of come along to libertarian ideas through Ayn Rand and others. Was there a particular incident or something else that caused you to say that, hey, I've got to step up and do something, I got to get involved? Was there something in your community or something else that sort of got you going on this?
I'm sorry, are you talking about as far as within the city of Detroit?
Yeah, or just saying you wanted to get involved in politics in general. Yeah.
Well, okay, because there's two prongs to that, and the first part is, as far as being a libertarian, I had actually started out, and like I said, I am from Detroit also. I actually started out, thinking more on the left. My parents were both solid Democrats when they were living. My father, in fact, was a very active Democrat person within the Democratic Party. I personally had started to come around to think, well, I didn't like the system. I knew something was wrong with it. Didn't know what, but all the anti-establishment people I knew at the time seemed to be communists. And so I started out really as a communist. Literally, I read Marx. I liked it, especially the part about the state will wither away, which I kind of, can lead into the next thing here. So,
Scotty, I just wanted to jump in for a second there. It's funny because we've seen a lot of people who are really solid minds in the libertarian movement who they kind of got started that way. They were sort of thinking, hey, things are unfair. I'm sort of a socialist. Even Walter Block, we had him on the show, and I know that was kind of early on. He actually started out as a socialist, and it sounds like he had a similar track as you. He got some of the Ayn Rand people got a hold of him, and they sort of changed his mind. And I think he started out with objectivism and then trailed on to economics. So it's not that odd, I guess, of a path, even though it seems odd for libertarians. But sorry to jump in there. I just wanted to. Oh,
yeah, it's quite all right. Yeah, because a lot of people will think that somehow we're just bleeding off, disgruntled Republicans or Republican light, or I don't know. I've heard all kinds of things connecting us with Republicans. Some people come from that direction, but that isn't where I came from. And that's okay if we meet in the same place eventually, which we have. I was actually handed a copy of Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, while having, political debates over lunch with a friend at Western Michigan, on the west side of my state, and going to college. That I opened that book a communist and closed it a capitalist. And as far as, it's funny the way the terms are. I really think laissez-faire is the more important part of the phrase laissez-faire capitalist, because you could be a laissez-faire socialist. In other words, as long as you're not forcing it on anybody, you can do what you want with your money. You can make whatever voluntary arrangements you wish, and still be ethical. It's just a matter of, getting aggression. And I was a peace activist, prior to that time. And I was definitely, when it came to personal behavior, if you had me fill out a Nolan chart, I would have been like on the left corner. So I would have been like 100% on personal liberty and just not getting the economics. And it was really seeing the bridge between the two, that you could not have personal liberty and not have economic liberty. That really is what flipped me as far as ideology goes. Now, on the political front, as far as being a candidate over in Detroit, what got me going was something else, in the sense that I had already been a candidate running on the Libertarian Party banner in part for partisan office, but that was more of an educational campaign. I did not really have a realistic chance of winning, though. I always told people there's no reason I can't win if you go ahead and vote for me. But what I did in Detroit was really, when I really got involved, was in the whole issue of police overreach and the matter of a lot of surveillance policies being instituted in Detroit, and also there being incidents of the police doing things outside, some police doing things that were really violating people's rights, even within the context of law as we have it here. And I got real active in that area and ran for police commissioner a couple times already. And it was a district-wide office. So in the course of doing that, I was already involved campaigning to people in my district in the city of Detroit. So the switch to Community Advisory Council really came about as realizing, well, I got maybe roughly a third of the vote the first time I ran for police commissioner. And I'm like, well, it looks like I can get, some people to vote for me, but just they like this other guy. And
just to break in for a second, Scotty, when you ran for police commissioner, were you able to say you were a libertarian, or was it something where it was a nonpartisan type of position?
It was a nonpartisan position. Again, I didn't make it a secret as a libertarian. I didn't use it as a selling point either, because, well, quite honestly, it wouldn't help as a selling point in a place where everyone's a Democrat. So I let them, everyone knew I was a libertarian, but I focused on the issues which, us libertarians feel strongly about privacy rights. We feel strongly about, limiting or in some cases not having, police powers control our lives. And so, and definitely against aggression in some of the cases where I had become an activist for individual causes. For instance, we had this one case of a corporal beating up a woman in an emergency room that needed mental health. Had mental health issues, needed some help. She didn't need to be beaten up. That kind of thing got me really motivated for the individuals who were suffering at the hands of it.
So Scotty, are you saying you saw in Detroit a problem of police? You said there was a problem of police overreaching. Are there specific reforms that you want to see within the police service? Is there some endemic problem? Or are you saying that there have been some high-profile incidents that have caused grave concern? Or so are you saying there's some structural issues within the police service that need attention?
Yeah, there are definitely issues that need attention, and they definitely need to reform their policies. They don't even necessarily follow their policies, but we have an oversight board. Just to clarify what's going on with the police in Detroit, we have an oversight board that is supposed to be able to hold police who do wrong things accountable, and supposed to be, really a voice for members of the community who have complaints about treatment by the police. And that board just has become very ineffective. They meet every week and do a lot of talk and don't necessarily take that much action. They have investigators that are supposed to investigate the complaints that are just overwhelmed. And there aren't really teeth in their policies. To give you one example, we had a woman who was beat up in a hospital by a corporal I mentioned earlier. And what was really remarkable about that case is he got promoted to sergeant after being convicted in a court of law of assault, and still was able to get a promotion. And this is on duty. And in my opinion, someone who behaves like this person shouldn't even be in the police department, no less get a promotion. And the poor woman who was abused this way is like a victim of the guardianship system, and is like basically is now incommunicado. So, but why weren't there any consequences in this case? There is a systemic problem, and that is that the police unions have so much power that if the even though the charter of the city of Detroit, which is like the constitution for the city, says that the Board of Police Commissioners can deny them a promotion, Well, the court said no, but your union contract says that you have to promote them. And so even though our charter says that this board, which did vote not to promote the person, he still gets the promotion. So that's the kind of thing that's broken here. Is we have to have really a board of police commissioners that's willing to go to court and appeal those kinds of decisions, rather than just kind of take it sitting down and say they're for one thing and do something else.
Well, Scotty, I know you've mentioned that so many of these people are Democrats there. Do you find you're able to, I guess, have a dialogue with many of these people and sort of, maybe sort of bring their thinking along a little bit on issues of liberty, and maybe some of the libertarian solutions to some of these problems?
Yes. And that's what's one thing that's good is you can get on an issue and get people interested in it based upon, you find that common ground and you use that as sort of a wedge, if you will, to kind of work your way into, the rest of what people are pursuing or thinking about politically. I know one case I could think of is where we had a situation in which the city was over assessing the value of properties and taxing people based upon the tax formula with these inflated values. And so the people were paying more taxes than legally they should have been required to pay. I mean, morally, we don't believe in any of them, but legally, there was still an amount they were supposed to pay legally, and they were being charged way more than that. Some people were losing their homes. Some people, were pushed into bankruptcy by the process. And a lot of people have suffered. It became quite an issue among, believe it or not, among progressives in Detroit who just, thought that, saw this as an assault on the poor. So I was at a rally where people were protesting against overtaxation, and I was holding up a big sign that said taxation is theft. And, I had like a couple of signs. I actually handed it to a guy who was like leader of some group that was pretty well left-leaning group, but had picked up this issue as, showing solidarity with the community and all this stuff. And he was holding up a sign that said #taxation is theft. So, kind of worked it on in there because he definitely felt like taxation was theft in that case anyway. Now, if it had been some corporation paying big taxes, moving into, some big operation they were doing in the city, probably wouldn't feel that way. But in this case, he definitely felt like taxation was theft. They kind of, brought him in there.
Well, let me ask something here. So philosophically, I could understand the whole concept of taxation is theft. Philosophically, I understand it. But where do we draw the line? I mean, the government does need some funds to manage its operations, and we, the citizens, indeed must pay for that. So where do you draw the line as to what is a legitimate government function and thus should be paid for versus the whole issue of taxation is theft?
Well, I'm definitely not going to likely see an end to taxation in the city in the near future. So it's really a matter of the, kind of the goal where one is going versus where one is. And there's a big journey in between the two. So I think part of this is, standing up against millages that would increase our taxes more. And in cases like this, where you had a group that was basically, a large number of individuals, homeowners in the city of Detroit who were denied, some cases denied their homes, some people simply being having to pay more money than they would have otherwise have to pay. That, it's baby steps. And so, that one area is simply to challenge taxes where they are higher than legally justified and start there. Another thing is to look at various things that are causing expense in the community and stand up against that, to try to reduce the obligations that the city has to pay on. If you reduce the obligations, then you reduce the perceived need for more taxes. We have a case, for instance, where we have a whole bunch of infrastructure work being done that is completely unnecessary and is costing the taxpayers. Where they're doing a whole bunch of road renovations or whatever they call them, upgrades, but I call them downgrades, where they're closing off traffic lanes and putting up a bunch of and putting in like these bike lanes that when you look at them, nothing wrong with bikes. I like bikes. But when you look at a road and you see like one bike, maybe after a half hour of looking up the bike lane and there's a traffic jam next to you because the cars don't have enough places to drive, it seems like perhaps they have misdirected their resources. So There's a whole bunch of areas where you'd ask for cutting spending. Alternative funding methods, I guess in the long run, would be what we're talking about as far as how do people pay for things they need. I mean, we could have we already got independent contractors doing like the trash pickup and stuff, but then you don't have a lot of competition. Maybe bringing more competition so that people have more choice over who's picking up their trash would be a move in that direction. The Community Advisory Council I sit on, by the way, it doesn't get a penny in taxpayer money. So we operate on a volunteer basis, independent of any dependence on taxes. One thing about that I was also going to add is the reason we even have a Community Advisory Council in this district is it's the only part of Detroit city government that's created by petition. In other words, our charter automatically establishes mayor, automatically establishes city council, clerk, and police commissioners. But it doesn't automatically establish our community advisory councils. Those are something that I actually petitioned to create here. And then, so in other words, these offices that we ran for were a result of a petition I circulated. And people might say, well, but aren't you, for less government? I'm like, yeah, this thing cost us any money. And it gives people more of a voice. And so I consider it a plus and an asset in that direction. And it gave me a chance to meet with people. And the one thing I would say for libertarians thinking of running for office anywhere.
Hold that thought, Scotty, because we're out of time for our audience on public access. So if you want to follow up and find out exactly the key point that Scotty's about to touch on, you're going to have to go online and listen to the rest of the show. And you can find that at knuckleheadsofliberty.com or find us on Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble. So definitely join us there to follow the rest of the show.
Okay, Jason, sorry.
Well, hold on. Let Scotty finish his thought here real quickly.
No, I have to say this. I'm sorry. Okay. They'll have to cut this off. I have to sign off a little bit. I'll rejoin in a few minutes, but I have to sign off.
Okay.
I apologize. My apologies. Okay.
No problem.
But James, you'll have to cut this off. Okay. All right. See you guys in a little bit.
Okay. So, Scotty, go ahead with what you were saying.
Oh, yeah, certainly. So what I was getting at is if you're a libertarian and you want to run for office, well, and this should apply for anyone running for office, but a lot of times libertarians need to be reminded of it. There is no substitute for interacting with the voters in the community. It's one thing to be able to just go to, the echo chamber and hang out with the people one agrees with, that are like-minded and have, lovely conversations. And it's quite another to actually talk to people who you don't necessarily agree with on a lot of things. And you got to find an area where you do agree or you're not going to make any progress. But look for where you can find some common ground and talk to people one-on-one in a district. And I used to hate the fact that that in order to, for instance, if when the Libertarian Party got temporarily put into the primaries, that we had a petition to get candidates, some of the candidates had a petition to get their names on the ballot. Because other than that, we pretty much pick all our candidates at conventions and it's easy. Well, for the nonpartisan elections in Detroit, it's equal ground. Everyone's got a petition to get on the ballot. There's no issue of what party you're with or anything like that. And in a sense, petitioning becomes a great form of campaigning because one, it gives you have an excuse to talk to people instead of just walking up out of the, you got a clipboard and what you're doing is you're collecting signatures. So you have an excuse to talk to them. It forces you to be persuasive because you're actually trying to get them to do something. So it's one thing to hand someone a card as they're wandering by in a crowd or stand, wave a sign. It's quite another that you're actually trying to get somebody else to do something for you that now amounts to, a signed statement of agreement with something you're doing. So petitioning for police commissioner, I had to get on the ballot. I had to go door to door and talk to people, or go places where people in my district hung out and talk to them one-on-one. The same thing then went for community advisory council. And the same thing went when I created, I didn't create because all the signers created it. But when I circulated a petition to create the community advisory council, there was definitely like maybe 2 or 3 times the signature threshold to meet as being a candidate. I had to, talk to a lot of people. I knocked on, in the course of being a candidate for different offices in Detroit, I have knocked on every door in my district. And I've talked to a good percentage of the people living in this district. So it's a lot of work and requires outreach and direct interaction with people. I've not talked to any libertarians who have got elected in a contested election to anything without direct interaction with people. The only time I've heard of anyone, anyone getting elected who has not been, actively campaigning with lots of people, lots of constituents getting elected is if it's something where no one else was running. Or, where it was uncontested.
Well, and that certainly, sounds like that's a truism that you got to get out there, knock on the doors, walk the beat, all that stuff. But as far as funding goes, if somebody's sitting there listening to you and they say, man, I want to do this, how much, money does it take roughly to do this? I mean, do you have to use some of your own funds? Is the Libertarian Party there to help you out at all? What are some of those challenges?
Yes and yes. I definitely had to use some of my own funds. But again, most of the money you spend on campaigns goes into advertising. And there's been research to support the idea that a direct contact has maybe 10 times the influence of any other advertising or outreach tool to a person. So again, that's one thing that doesn't cost a lot of money, definitely costs a lot of time. And printing literature to hand out physically, if you're not mailing it, and if you're not advertising on some medium or in a big publication, is relatively cheap. So that's really how, most of my initial campaign expenses were simply printing costs and then getting a lot of material out to people. But yeah, but eventually, and especially in a contested election, one may need to do more. And so then one does have to do some fundraising. I will say that my party has helped me out, that they did give me some money toward campaigns in the past. The office I got elected to most recently, Community Advisory Council, one thing that's kind of an interesting twist on all of that is that I actually got elected this last time around with no significant campaigning for that office, but that's only because I had done so much before. that I was able to sort of rest on my laurels in a relatively uncontested election where the only opponents were write-in candidates and they didn't really campaign real heavily. But I didn't know they wouldn't, but they didn't. That was just this last time around as I got reelected. I basically ran for a vacancy that existed in that office. And the reason I didn't get elected in the regular term is I was running for police commissioner. And I lost that, it was a 2-to-1 ratio in the outcome of that election. So, yeah.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you too was the Libertarian Party a good source of I guess helpful information too to get you going? Because I know for a lot of people, if you're sitting there, you're getting excited, you're thinking about doing this, is that sort of the first step is just to talk to the party and get some advice from them?
Somewhat, but I really had, as far as getting, as far as running for office in general, yes. But a lot of times libertarians are focused, more on the partisan offices and on like the state legislature, federal offices, more educational campaigns. So for the local offices, there was some experience in Michigan with this already. I think probably the longest serving libertarian in office is probably Andy LaCuro of Hazel Park. He's been there since the 90s, I think, late 90s maybe, and at least since the turn of the century. And so we've had other people get elected to local office in, some of the more affluent counties also in Michigan, local office. We have someone elected currently up in northern Michigan to partisan office as a libertarian. But what both her and she actually won a contested election in which a Democrat was a candidate up there. So what I found, though, is for the most part, the electability efforts really happen based upon our connections with the community and not our connections with the party. If you don't, you have to have strong connections with the people that you're expecting to vote for you, or the opinion leaders that influence the people you expect to vote for you, your constituents. And for those people, it's not the Libertarian Party. So I did get help, though. I'm not putting that down. So, I mean, as far as being a candidate for partisan office, Libertarian Party had all kinds of backup resources. For nonpartisan, you can get an endorsement from your party. That doesn't necessarily help a lot either if you're running someplace where you're that's not leaning heavily libertarian. But what it can do is then give other people in the party a cause to look and say, hey, well, this person's a libertarian running, we can support them. It also allows then the party itself to lend resources to you and promote you as an endorsed candidate, because otherwise, they're not just, the party isn't just going to support anyone who isn't a libertarian just running for nonpartisan office. They want to actually have some, there's got to be some vetting. They did contribute some money. There were members of the party who helped as volunteers. So that's another area in which your party can be a good support base, is if you have maybe limited resources and community support, but you believe you can build more to do some of the legwork, some of the, the door knocking and the, or even your campaign committees, you can draw on your fellow Libertarian Party members. And so I'd like to kind of, acknowledge some of the LP members who have backed me up. We've had Gregory Stempfel, who's recently ran for Secretary of State in Michigan, has been my treasurer and campaign manager on a number of occasions and helped me out with that end of being a candidate, both for partisan and nonpartisan office. Gregory Creswell, who lives in my district, is a Detroiter, but also a very dedicated Libertarian Party member, and he was a former governor candidate. He was a tremendous asset throughout my campaign, going door to door in Detroit. I'd like to acknowledge that we had some good people that in addition, that have been helping out one of my more recent campaigns for police commissioner. I had Mike Saliba and Andrew Chatterton went door to door with me quite a bit and helped get me on the ballot. So I've had a lot of help from people in the party. So also I've connected well with some local officials, like one of the police commissioners, Commissioner Willie Burton, has been a tremendous help, because both him and I have worked together on matters where we believe the police could do a better job of recognizing people's civil liberties, and also the city government, not doing all the mass surveillance that it seems to look to do.
Well, you listed quite a few other libertarians there. Maybe one of these days we can have one of them on too to let us know a little bit about their experience as well. Maybe.
And Gregory Creswell. One thing about Gregory I failed to mention, he was. You see, I got reelected to the Community Advisory Council, and the first election after we established it, Gregory Creswell was one of the two candidates who got elected to it, who was a libertarian. So when you saw it pulled up that picture, and I think there were 3 people initially elected to the 5.
James, can we bring up the visual real quick here? I'm not sure if this is the one that is talking about. Looks like there it goes.
Yeah, the one you're showing at the beginning, right? Okay. Those were the first 3 people elected to the Community Advisory Council that was established by the petition I circulated. And yeah, obviously I'm the guy on the left. I don't know if it's obvious. I'm wearing a suit there. All right, and the guy in the middle is a Democrat, and he's a well-known person in the district. And then on the right is Gregory Creswell, and he's a libertarian. And so he's been actively ran for governor before as libertarian and so forth. So two out of the 3 people who got elected on the initial, and by the way, the middleman is Washington Newsom. I didn't say his name. But the 2 out of those 3 people were actually libertarians on that first round. Now, we actually needed 5 people to have a complete Community Advisory Council. And so I thought we had more than that, because there were a few write-in candidates, but they didn't know that there was paperwork they had to do to be counted as a write-in candidate. So they ended up not actually getting in there. And, we actually had to get some appointees to fill in the blanks. But just letting you know, we actually had a couple people elected in Detroit.
Well, that's always great to hear that we got a few more libertarians out there that have either are trying to or have been elected to office. I did want to shift gears though now and talk about a few sort of things in the news about Detroit that maybe you might be able to give libertarians a little more insight on. Tim, was there anything before we shift to that you wanted to jump in on the prior stuff? With sort of the mechanics of the job and everything else.
Just wanted when Scotty was referring to taxation being theft, I was just wondering if this city council or community council had any push toward sales taxes and other sources of revenue that are not, like if you have an income tax, that's definitely theft to me. Taxation is theft, that type of taxation, but not all taxation is theft. For example, a sales tax, it still gives the consumer the decision, do I pay this tax? Do I buy this item and pay the tax attached, or do I not buy it? So that's a choice. So I don't consider that to be theft. A tariff would be also choice of the...
No. Froze up for a second there, Tim.
Okay, yeah. So a tariff would be a choice by the producer of the good or the country from which it's being produced, that they would pay this tax ahead of time, and that, of course, they would have to alter pricing and so on to reflect that. But that's also a decision made by them, and so I don't consider that theft, but definitely the income tax. So for Scotty, has there been advisory council recommendations to go to a type of sales tax, for example?
First of all, I disagree respectfully with Tim's premise that not all taxation is theft. Actually, and by the way, I'm using that as kind of a broad phrase. Maybe the correct word I should say is extortion. Because theft, I mean, actually would be a literal taking of something, and whereas extortion, it's more like, well, pay this money or else, right? So it's not really theft in the literal sense, but more extortion. And I would say that if I'm a business and I want to sell something and I don't want to charge my customers the sales tax, or I ask, do you feel like paying a sales tax? Yes or no? I'm sorry, I'm doing things because I realize my tablet's tipping here. You're still making them pay it. I mean, the government is still going to have consequences if someone does not collect that tax. There's still going to be consequences if I, as a customer, go to a business and I say, okay, I'm looking at the prices and all that, and I see what they add up to, and I put that much money on the counter, and they go, oh, wait, you still have to pay a tax. I'm like, well, I don't believe in taxes. Taxation is theft. And I walk out the door with the items fully paid for at the priced amount. What's going to happen to me? I mean, you could kind of, work through the whole causality, and there's going to be consequences. So I don't see that as any different, really, than what I pay on an income tax. The only difference is income tax is preemptive, so I'm getting the money afterward. And yeah, you can argue, well, you don't have to shop someplace, and therefore you don't have to pay the sales tax. And you could also argue that I don't have to work, and so I don't have to pay an income tax. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to survive, you need to do both. You have to buy something. You have to be involved in commerce somehow. You need to, and that works as both the earning and the spending end of things. So it's just like one gets you coming and one gets you going. So in my opinion, they're both coercive to that degree. Now, as far as the direct question of has the CAC taken a position on?
Oh, hold on just a second, Scotty.
Shift?
Leon, could you mute while you're not talking, because you got some road noise going on there?
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, when you want to talk, just unmute and come on in. But there it goes. It sounds like you're not making noise. Awesome. Go ahead, Scott.
I have not seen. We have not taken a position in favor of any kind of tax shift from one format to another. I have not really seen people asking for that. What we have done is address the matter of what's commonly called overtaxation, which I know sounds redundant to libertarians, but in Detroit, what it means is that there have been cases where the property taxes were way overbilled and people lost homes, lost money, and got nothing back. So that's really the biggest thing we've done as far as advocacy in that realm. Is we have found that there was a strong consensus among the community that the city needs to make people whole on the overtaxation as defined there. And they have not done that. But that is one area where I think both libertarians and a large consensus of the community in Detroit would line up in regard to taxes.
Well,
all right.
Let me ask a quick question here. You're using the expression overtaxation. Could you give me a more definitive answer of that, please?
Okay, what that means is there's a formula the city's supposed to follow as far as how it levies property taxes. And the story broke in our newspapers a couple of years ago that they had not been following that formula, that instead they had been, they followed the formula, but it depended on an assessed value of the property, and that they were effectively inflating the values of properties so they could collect more taxes. They were claiming the property had a market value that was well above what anyone was able to sell the property for, and then people would be billed taxes according to that. And if they didn't pay their taxes, the property taxes, eventually they could lose their homes. So that was what was referred to as overtaxation. And it turned out being quite huge. It turned out being around the order of $600 million. I personally am a homeowner, and I personally have seen my house overassessed. Fortunately, I, unlike maybe a lot of other people, was able to work in the system and jump through the hoops they wanted me to hop through in time to avoid getting overtaxed. And I had to appeal it over a period of 5 years. There was an administrative process, and it was retroactive, and I did get my taxes brought back down, and they had to even send me money after a vigorous effort in that area. So that's what I mean by overtaxation. I myself managed to undo the overtaxation of me personally, but a lot of people in the city don't have the wherewithal to go through all the hoops that I had to go through, which I think is sort of what they were counting on.
Well, one of the things I wanted to jump in on, and maybe this is a good segue to, some of the other local news of Detroit, but you guys had a big bankruptcy that happened back in, I guess it was 2013, but there was a lot of, stress on the city going back as far as maybe 2008, I guess, and the housing crisis and everything. And how much of this stuff was tied into that? And let me bring up, James, can we bring up the visual too? Just in case people aren't aware, back in 2013, things were kind of dire. And so here's some sort of pictures of Detroit that The Guardian had. And it shows, some of the state of some of the places there. And, I'm not sure, how much of this was maybe issues with taxation or not, but I mean, here you can see that, some houses were just sort of abandoned and just left to decay. So it was certainly, I think even 60 Minutes ran quite an expose on some of the stuff that was happening to Detroit at the time. But you could see, like, here's an example of a house that's just falling down on itself right next to another house that's sort of well maintained. But some of the houses were literally selling for just a couple. It sounds like, maybe if you had $100, you could buy a house back then. Maybe. I don't know how true that was, but, maybe you could give us a little insight to that. But I guess you guys have sort of come out of that bankruptcy, and it sounds like you guys are sort of recovering. So could you give us a little bit of insight on that whole thing, Scotty? And maybe was taxation part of the issue of this whole thing?
Well, it was definitely part of the issue. I mean, you had actually a couple different things going on with that housing bubble. I mean, part of it was the fact that, people weren't able to pay their mortgages and also weren't able to pay the taxes. So they were losing their homes for both. The one exacerbated the other because, I mean, if you have to spend a lot of money on your mortgage, you don't have as much money for the taxes. If you have to spend a lot of money on your taxes, you don't have as much for your mortgage. What happened, I think a lot of people got burned because they went for the adjustable rate mortgages, what they call ARMs. And that was a real bad move. And of course, it's kind of a buyer beware thing on that. I definitely, when I had to get a mortgage, and it was an uphill battle, I had to really, do things to improve my credit and, really work hard to get my credit worthiness to where I could buy a home. I insisted that I wasn't going to be doing it on an adjusted rate because I knew that once you do that, you could just lose it all later because it can get out of your range. But yeah, we had the devaluation of the properties that came about as a result of this housing bubble bursting was part of it, in fact, because the inflated rates I was talking about that led to the overassessment would have been appropriate rates, at least legally, prior to that housing bubble crashing. And what happened is when the property plummeted in value, they kept taxing it as if it had not plummeted in value. So, for instance, the house I'm living in right now would have initially been valued at, and the property that it's on would be valued at about $100,000. And after that crash, my next door neighbors, who had an even nicer home than myself, couldn't get rid of theirs for $30,000. So Pete, that's why you saw like a whole bunch of abandoned houses. Not only did people have to leave them, there wasn't anybody moving back in, because basically the values were so low, no one wanted to invest in them, no one wanted to buy them. Even though the prices were low, people just did not think it was a worthwhile investment.
If I could jump in, Scotty, if I could jump in here for a second here. But in Detroit, isn't there some real structural problems in terms of policies that were put in place, and it drove a lot of businesses out of Detroit and into the suburbs, and they took their tax base with them. Some residents also fled the city and ended up in the suburbs, and that caused a lot of, you shrunk your tax base. Isn't that part of the problem, a structural problem?
Okay, I heard what you said about a lot of people moving out because of the city policies, but then I didn't quite get the last thing you said.
I'm saying, before even the mortgage crisis of the 2008, even before that, weren't there some serious structural problems in Detroit that caused a lot of people to flee the city, a lot of businesses to flee the city, and cause the destruction of your tax base?
Yes, there have been a number of things over the years. One, going way back historically, one big strike that really hit the city hard was back in '67, when there is a bit of an uprising over, and this gets to police oversight again, really, over the way the police were treating residents, which was definitely a legitimate gripe. Unfortunately, some of the people involved in that uprising also destroyed the city they were living in and burned down a lot of buildings. And, it's hard to say which side of that conflict was really doing the damage. But the bottom line is a lot got destroyed. A lot of property was burned down. A lot of people use that as a reason to move out right then. And after that time, there was kind of a continuation of people moving out of Detroit and into the suburbs. So that was a problem early on. Crime has not gone away in the city. A lot of people simply don't want to live in Detroit because they don't feel safe. And it's still, I saw a person shoot one of my neighbor's dogs right in front of me and ran off, and the police haven't done anything about it. So violent crime, is a problem that's happening all around. We had people getting shot at a party a few blocks from my house. That it's not safe in Detroit as far as compared to a lot of other places. And definitely, these types of acts of violence should not be happening at all, yet they continue. So that, I think, is a major disincentive. The propensity of break-ins and thefts kept a lot of businesses from being in the city. So public safety is also a big issue in Detroit, and I think had a lot to do with a lot of people moving out.
But what is being done about the structural problems? I know you guys went through the bankruptcy, and I know some new leadership was put in place in Detroit. But are there any serious initiatives to deal with the actual structural problems within Detroit? Because I don't know if anything have changed, quite frankly. That's what I'm trying to get at.
And just to add on to Leon's question, in your opinion, too, is the recovery real? Does it look like Detroit has really come back? Sorry, go ahead, Scotty.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to think of structural problems, and I guess one of them again has to do with, on the one hand, we want police to be effective.
Uh-oh. Looks like we just lost Scotty. Okay. Well, you know what? Leon, you're muted still.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know if my question was too difficult. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, that said, there was something to segue into while we try and wait for Scotty to come back, just see if he's coming back. James, maybe you could bring this up. One of the things Scotty mentioned was seeing a dog shot right in front of him. And one of the crazy things that has been going on in Detroit is, and Reason recently picked this up, but the police and Scotty touched upon this too, abuses of the police department and other things, but in sort of their cavalier way they're enforcing the law there, they wind up shooting an awful lot of dogs in drug raids and going into people's backyards. And in this particular story that Reason had, there was a woman who's suing the police department because police came into her backyard looking for a suspect, didn't find him, but found her dog apparently and shot it.
And shot the dog.
Killed the dog. And then apparently, because they didn't want to just leave the evidence of what they did just sitting out there, they threw it in the neighbor's garbage can. and it apparently did not notify her that they had done this. And so she was very upset and is suing. But one of the other crazy things that's going on in this story as well, they talked about there was one officer in all of these drug raids and other things who has wound up, they said, shooting, let me see here. Here it is. Over 80 dogs through the course of his career he shot.
He shot more dogs than criminals. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and it's really, kind of does bring up the point in all these cities that are kind of big on gun control. Whose hands are the right hands? They're just running around blasting our four-legged friends. You guys have any thoughts on this story real quick?
Well, there have been many stories about police brutality actually and overreaching. Scotty does have a point about this police overreaching in Detroit. He does have a point about that. And this is what I was trying to get to about the structural issues within Detroit. Not only in the civilian realm, but also in the realm of law enforcement, because law enforcement in Detroit has a reputation for overreaching, whether it's abusing their power against citizens or whether it's doing the kind of crap you just talk about in terms of walking into people's backyards and end up shooting dogs that have nothing to do with the criminal they're going after. There have been a lot of abuses that have come out of Detroit, and this is something that they will have to address if they ever plan to change some of the deep structural issues that Detroit has, which started in the 1970s. Oh, he's back, yes.
Yeah, and Scotty, let me just let you know we
back in. I was out and just.
Oh, sorry, Scotty. I just wanted to let you know when we lost you there, because you had talked about witnessing a dog being shot, we jumped onto the story real quick of the police shooting all these dogs and how this one woman was suing, and Detroit police have had to apparently cough up hundreds of thousands of dollars over some of these dog shootings. And anyways, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that as well that you wanted to jump in as well, since we've got the audience on that topic.
Well, and it does kind of connect with Leon's issue about systemic problems, because we have the liability the city of Detroit has built up over its misdirected policing efforts. At the same time has caused economic problems because the city has to pay out millions of dollars in damages over these things. Like one of the probably smarter investments as far as spending money in Detroit goes was the bringing about of body cams, which are cameras that the police officers wear. And what that does is then it really kind of holds them to a greater accountability, because the people overseeing them can actually see what happened and what they did. And at the same time prevents a lot of frivolous or, dishonest lawsuits that may bring about where actually the police weren't doing anything wrong and people are just complaining because perhaps they wanted to keep out of trouble or saw an opportunity to win a lawsuit or whatever, that it actually reveals those as well. So on the one hand, it keeps the police more in line. On the other hand, helps save the taxpayers money when it comes down to incorrect or frivolous lawsuits alleging things they actually didn't do wrong. I'm trying to think of structurally, the city of Detroit, I guess structurally things that I would like to see changed are a lower income tax and a better management of the property taxes where people aren't getting overtaxed. I think that would be a step in the right direction. And, not renewing maybe some of these millages that come up would be a good process in the right direction. And reducing red tape for local businesses, because local business owners often do run into a lot of unnecessary regulations. And a lot of times people say, well, yeah, but this community, this affluent community in such and such suburb or in a different county has regulations like this, and we need to do this too so we can be rich like them. No, I think it's because they can get away with doing that to their businesses because they're so prosperous that people want to have a business there because they can, wealthy customers, you make more money off than poor ones. Not because that helps a business at all. And in Detroit, I think we need to attract more businesses, and making it easier and having a less restrictive environment in which to work could be an attraction to bring people into Detroit, though perhaps, the average person is not as affluent as the person living somewhere else. So those are some structural changes we could make. Another big one is in the area of the water department. Our water department has gone from being, reputed as being perhaps one of the best in the world as far as having very good water quality, drinking water, safe water. That's pretty much as good as anything you get in a bottle that, as far as at least unless it's like spring water or something. And at the same time being a very low price. Well, that second thing's no longer true. Our water rates have gone up probably about tenfold since I first started paying water bills in the city of Detroit, way ahead of inflation. And part of that, they ended up becoming part of some regional water authority, and the prices went up even more. So one thought I had is, bring it back to Detroit control and perhaps making the water department into a nonprofit corporation, or maybe even a profit corporation, but then selling the shares to the individual Detroiters and letting the Detroiters own their own water department. And I think perhaps they'd be a lot more responsive to the customers if the customers were in fact also owners.
Yeah.
So Scotty, when I'm sorry. You had something, Jason? Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's certainly an innovative idea to think about correcting some of these problems of just sort of government runaway and cost with some of these utilities and other things that they have a large hand in regulating.
Indeed. So, but what I was going to ask was when Snyder was the governor, didn't you guys have a problem with water with some city that some of the kids end up with drinking water that had lead poisoning or some stuff like that? Wasn't there some issue like that?
Maybe I think that was Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, no, Flint, yes.
Yeah.
Flint, yes.
Yeah, Flint is, it's one thing when we're kind of on a nationally broadcast show like this is, a lot of people don't realize that, how close or how far apart actually Flint and Detroit are. There's actually a substantial distance between Flint and Detroit. That being said, Flint used to get a lot of its water from Detroit. We piped water out a very long way. That's why I was saying Detroit was able to really give its people good prices on water because they were supplying a huge part of the state and could again if it was managed better. The people in Flint, however, decided at one point that they were going to try to take a more independent route and do their own water system, which on its own may not seem like a bad idea. Unfortunately, the way they went about it wasn't quite right, and they ended up using, and it had something to do with the chemistry of what they were doing with the water supply and how they were purifying it, that it actually drew lead out of the pipes that was already there, but it just had not been contaminating the water as much until they changed the way they were doing things. And something in that process caused their water to come out much more toxic than it would have otherwise been with this, even with the same infrastructure. And so, yeah, as a result, the water quality did get exceptionally bad in Flint. And there was a lot of back and forth and finger pointing between state regulators, between the city of Flint, as far as who was really at fault. A lot of the oversight of the water was in the state's hands, and so that's where a lot of the culpability ended up landing. But yeah, Flint is where a lot of this suffering with the water crisis happened. I think there was a lack of transparency by the politicians in Flint, as well as people in our governor's office with our former governor, in that regard. Both of them basically kind of trying to downplay the problem, brush it under the rug, and meanwhile, people are drinking this water that is somewhat toxic and hurting them in the long run.
Well, certainly shows that the government is not always a solution, for most people.
In fact, Spike Cohen was present at a rally that we held over by the when he was running for vice president over by the water plant in Flint, and I was out there for that. When he was running with Joe Jorgensen, and he made kind of a point about that whole thing of you can't count on government to do it right, and people might say, well, private businesses make this or that mistake, but well, look at the mistakes the government makes when they're doing it. So it was pretty good rally.
Yeah. Well, we're quite a bit over time, but part of this because we had some delays and technical difficulties. But there is one thing I wanted to wrap up on real quick, and I think this one item is kind of an interesting one for libertarians, maybe. But in Detroit, and maybe James, you could bring up this visual real quick. But there was a local city in Detroit that wound up making a flag ban. Not so much a flag ban, but I think they essentially a ban on having other flags than the government flag be able to be shown, I believe, on government buildings. And so it's being couched sort of as an issue of banning the gay pride flag, but it's actually sort of an issue where they've sort of banned all other flags, and it's just sort of made the news because it was in Pride Month. So they decided not to let the pride flag be flown on some of the buildings. But I guess another aspect to the story as well is it was I guess majority Muslim city council, I guess, that made this decision, I believe. So what are your thoughts on this, Scotty? Is this a kind of what are the implications of liberty on this story, I guess?
Well, first of all, this is the first I heard of it. I live in Metro Detroit. So apparently it just has not been big as a local news story, which is interesting. Based on what you said, I would guess the most likely, does it name the city in the article?
I believe it does. There were two articles, Hamtramck, Michigan, but I think they said that was a suburb of Detroit or something. So
actually,
Dearborn.
No, I was thinking Dearborn, but he just read Hamtramck because Dearborn also is probably a majority of Muslims on the city council, though I'm not certain. I'm guessing that would be likely. Hamtramck is got, and it is pronounced Hamtramck, even though it's missing the vowel in MCK or whatever. But it is actually surrounded by the city of Detroit. There are two cities in the city of Detroit, and that's why the title kind of is appropriate. Highland Park and Hamtramck, which basically touch each other at the corner, are completely surrounded by the city of Detroit. They're like little islands. The city of Hamtramck is a very multi-ethnic city, so I had not realized that the majority of the city council had become Muslim. It used to be majority Catholic, a lot of Eastern Europeans, but then Albanians are Eastern European and so on. But it's definitely, it's kind of a, Ellis Island of Southeast Michigan as far as where people go first to immigrate. So about that, obviously there is a civil liberties violation if individuals cannot fly whatever flags they want on their own property, regardless of whether one likes them or dislikes them, finds them offensive. I mean, in the end, if it's your property, you should be able to fly whatever flag you want on it. That's a free speech issue. You're using your space as a way of expressing your views to the community, and they can take it or leave it. So,
and to be clear too, this was mainly a ban on other flags on government property. So it was more not local government property, not private property. So,
yeah, and in that case, I would see it as really not that big a deal. And in a sense, it would almost be like, does the government want to be involved in advocacy of causes or not? Some would say yes, some say no, but perhaps that's an area where it would be appropriate for them to make decisions about which causes they wish to promote. I personally have no problem with, if the city of Detroit wants to have a pride flag flying at their buildings, but quite honestly, I don't recall ever seeing one there. Except maybe in February or something, some kind of statement. But I actually don't recall seeing any on any government buildings in Detroit.
Yeah, I think the city council in that situation had just decided to eliminate the whole flag battles going on, battle of the flags. So, one group wants one flag, the other group wants the other flag, their flag, and so they just decided to heck with all of this, and we're just gonna, ban anything but the state flag, the U.S. flag, and maybe a city flag. So, which I would have done. I mean, that's what I thought was normal. That's how it should be. I mean, it was just if it's a government building, why is it taking sides on issues? Just put the American flag or whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, it's funny because the way this story has been advertised around the country is it's been sort of like, well, this one group got in and they were super conservative, and so they just decided to ban this particular type of flag. But the reality is if it's a general rule that applies to everybody and keeps it equal, then it's not really it seems to me the libertarian position is to minimize what government is doing there, not to maximize it. So I don't know.
Well, it's not really a ban. It's not in my opinion, it's not really a ban if a public body decides that they're going to not promote something. It's just simply a decision of what they are or are not promoting, not really banning something, because it's not really preventing anyone else from doing it. So yeah, and I suppose it would probably be the safest position to simply not have any rather than to play favorites, because then you get into an equal treatment issue. Even if you start saying, well, we can wave your flag, but not your flag, it might turn into an equal treatment type concern.
Might be good for the flagpole manufacturing industry, though, to just allow every flag, any flag, thousands of flags.
That's the other way. So that's one position I've kind of taken about, like, when they have like religious displays. We got a separation of church and state, but if you take it as non-establishment and neutrality, the other end, as opposed to having none, is having all. And like, I went to a grade school, it was private, where we learned like several creation stories, for instance. Right? You could just have them all. Yeah, which can lead to some pretty freaky stuff, of course.
Well, don't give the government any idea. Let's just go to none. Keep it simple and let private groups figure it out for themselves. But I guess that's pretty much all the time we have on our show today. Scotty, did you want to leave the audience with any final messages?
What I would say is, there's two fronts that people push a lot of times. It's whether or not we should be educating people on issues and philosophy, or trying to get people elected. And I would say that you need to always have both. They both play a role. The educational candidates running partisan, trying to get ideas out there are essential as far as shifting the ideological discussion. But then from the practical discussion, it's good to get people into offices where we believe we can win. And, that often may be a little less, dramatic as far as issues go, but nonetheless, it's doing something instead of just saying something.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Scotty, for your service and being out there promoting liberty. We certainly need more of that in the country, and that's the only way we're going to get there is people like you step up and bring the fight. So anyways, thanks also to our audience for joining us today. And you can check out more of our past shows online where we've interviewed a lot of other people who are out there carrying the good fight for liberty. So we hope you'll check some of those out. Until the next one, stay tuned and stay free.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.